Please join us on our spring 2017 visit to the maritime provinces of northeastern Canada. We left home on May 14th, and we arrived in New Jersey on May 20th, where we stayed for 10 days visiting family. On May 30th, we met up with my brother and sister-in-law at their home in New York. They had rented this 25-foot motorhome and traveled with us for the next 8 days. The next 3 days were spent at different coastal campgrounds in Maine. Acadia National Park in Bar Harbor, a beautiful place. This is our camp at Cobscook Bay State Park in Maine. As you will see, most of our camps on this trip were right on the water. We crossed into New Brunswick, Canada, and stopped at Bay of Fundy National Park. The difference between high and low tides in the Bay of Fundy can exceed 40 feet. A little farther up the coast, we stopped at the Cape and Ridge Lighthouse to look around. That evening, we settled in at Murray Beach Provincial Park. The next day, we crossed the Confederation Bridge from New Brunswick to Prince Edward Island. The bridge is 8 miles long, and constructing it was quite a feat of engineering. This elaborate cathedral is Our Lady of Mount Carmel and is located in a sparsely populated area along the coast. Our camp at Linkletter Provincial Park near the town of Sunnyside. This is Chuck and Barb, a couple we met while camped at Linkletter. More of them later. The shoreline at Linkletter. This is the fishing village of Rustico on the north shore of PEI. In this photo, my brother and sister-in-law are getting ready to head home. The weather was unusually cold and windy during this part of the trip. Notice our clothing on this sunny morning. Jenny and I then visited the sand dunes at Prince Edward Island National Park. It's a spectacular beach, yet we saw only 3 or 4 other people in the time that we were there. Spent the night at Brudenell Provincial Park, then hopped the ferry to Nova Scotia in the morning. At Cape Breton in far eastern Nova Scotia, we visited the Glace Bay Miners Museum. Some of the coal mines in the area extend 7 miles off the coast beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Note the low ceiling. The tallest part of the shaft was 5 foot 2 inches and the shortest area was 4 foot 2 inches. Miners had to work stooped over all day, every day. Prior to mechanization, the coal carts were pulled by ponies. These ponies spent their entire lives in the mine. A 4 foot 2 inch section of the tunnel. The following day, it was a 6-hour ferry ride to Newfoundland. Into the belly of the beast. Views from the ferry deck. In this colorful lounge area, I spotted Chuck and Barb, the friends we had made 5 days earlier on Prince Edward Island. Chatting with them made the long boat ride pass quickly. This is the waterfall at Cheeseman Park, where we spent our first night in Newfoundland. The following day, Jenny spotted this beaver going about his business next to our campsite at Notre Dame Provincial Park. These guys are always fun to watch. On the north central coast, we made a spur-of-the-moment decision to catch a ferry to Fogo Island, a place we knew nothing about. This was our first encounter with the ice that would, in many ways, come to define the rest of our time in Newfoundland and Labrador. The area was experiencing the coldest spring in 43 years, hence all the ice and icebergs in the latter part of June. The ferry ride made you feel as if you were on an icebreaker. It was amazing. A major downside of all the ice was the inability for local fishermen, lobstermen, and crabbers to get out and make a living. The men cannot risk losing their gear to the ice, so they must wait for it to dissipate. The number of picturesque fishing villages that we saw on this trip was beyond counting. The large building in the background is the Fogo Island Inn. Though located in this remote area, it is of international caliber. The hotel boasts top-line entertainers, and people travel here from all over the world. Rooms exceed $1,500 per night. We opted to stay at the local Lions Club campground for $20 a night. The following photos were all taken from our camp. Sorry there are so many, but it was hard to stop taking pictures. Waking up to these views from camp was quite something. Enough! The return ferry trip. There was so much ice that the captain needed to wiggle the bow back and forth several times to get up to the dock. A view from the ferry. Then on to Twillingate. Scarecrows are fairly common in the Maritimes, and these two gents were there to welcome us. The Twillingate Lighthouse. Had to stay at this place. The following pictures are from the Bonavista Peninsula and the town of Bonavista. The Bonavista Lighthouse. We were told that Elliston was a good place to view Atlantic puffins, and it was. This is one of several offshore islands with puffin colonies. It was very cold and windy, and it made it difficult to stabilize our cameras. We realized that some of the photos are a bit blurry, but decided to include them anyway. Shortly after leaving Elliston, we came across this little guy by the side of the road. In Newfoundland, we saw quite a few of these large-scale wooden model boats in people's front yards. Pretty neat. Our home for the night at Loxton Path Provincial Park. A long day of driving took us back to Grossmoor National Park on the west coast. The following day, we drove up the coast, stopping at various features and attractions such as this rock formation known as the Arches. We also pulled in at numerous small coastal fishing villages and stopped at the site of the 1919 shipwreck of the SS Effie. You never know what you'll see in Newfoundland. The next town that we stopped at was Port au Choix. Here are two local lobstermen at work. The Point Riche Lighthouse is located several miles from Port au Choix. These two young caribou were grazing near the lighthouse. Another Lions Club campground, this one in Port au Choix and right on the beach. The view from bed the following morning. We stopped at a marine service yard in Port Saunders. Many large fishing vessels were scattered around the yard in various stages of rehabilitation. We spoke briefly with these men who were busy repairing fishing nets. They were very friendly and didn't mind answering my dumb questions about the boats or about their profession. Here, we're back on the highway and heading up the northern peninsula. Roadside gardens are a common sight in Newfoundland. As are huge stacks and piles of cut firewood. The wood piles are usually accompanied by sleds such as these to move the wood from place to place. We saw many small-scale lobstering operations. The men go out in the very early morning in small boats to check their pots and then return in the afternoon. This fellow said he had been doing this for 47 years. Each of these boxes holds about 50 pounds of lobster. Everyone in Newfoundland and Labrador tells you, don't drive at night. The moose make it too dangerous. Again, lots of icebergs in this area. This steel silhouette is located at Lazal Meadow. The Norse had a small settlement here almost 500 years prior to Columbus' discovery of the New World. These are replicas of the structures employed by the earliest Viking inhabitants. It was a cold, windy, and wet day, so all were glad when the outside tour ended and we could enter the longhouse. There were 4 or 5 reenactors in the longhouse who answered questions and demonstrated some traditional practices. The view out to sea from the longhouse. Not too far from the cultural center, we find this statue of Leif Erikson. The next day, Ginny and I kicked around the town of Raleigh near our campground. It's a beautiful little fishing village, and the early morning fog and ice added a special effect to our pictures. An ecological preserve was located on the far side of the bay, and we did some exploring. These 2 photos are taken of an iceberg hunter, hard at work procuring ice for drinks later that evening. More photos of the Raleigh area. The next morning, we boarded the ferry to Labrador. That's Chuck and Barb's camper van in front of us. We drove along a little sliver of eastern Quebec before proceeding east to Labrador. Along the way, we stopped at a small family business selling mussels and lobsters. We bought lobsters, and the owner cooked and cracked them open for us. The road from Blanc-Sablon, where the ferry landed, northeast to Red Bay was quite rough due to monster potholes. The provincial park we stopped at was closed due to snow, so we just camped by the side of the road. We camped in this manner for the rest of our time in Labrador. That evening, we enjoyed a lobster and pasta dinner with our new friends. At the Red Bay Interpretive Center, we learned of the strong Basque influence in this area of Canada. Between 1530 and the early 1600s, Basque whalers from France and Spain set up temporary camps near Red Bay for about 6 months each year to hunt for whales. From the Interpretive Center, we took a short boat ride out to Saddle Island. The self-guided tour around the island featured vestiges of the time when this was a major whaling center. These are the remains of the Bernier, a coal transport ship that was driven aground in 1966. Joining us on the Saddle Island trip were two young Canadians. This is Nick Pierre, who, for some inexplicable reason, loves to swim in cold water. Nick sent me this picture taken a day earlier when he actually swam out and hopped on this small iceberg. Brrr! From Red Bay, we head north and west on the Trans-Labrador Highway. That portion of the trip is approximately 700 miles, some paved, but much of the road is gravel. Here, we are greeted by a few of the locals. Jenny and I decided to take a side trip to the coastal town of St. Louis, which has one of several iceberg alleys that we came across on this trip. On the way to St. Louis, we came upon these on the top of a cliff. Piled rock figures called inuksuks are common throughout the Arctic. However, this was the first time we saw a dog accompanying two humans. Another curious critter. On this remote road, the government sponsors a program that allows you to pick up a satellite phone at the beginning of the Trans-Labrador Highway and turn it in at the end. At the Quebec border, we headed south another 350 miles to Baie-Camus on the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Again, much of this road was gravel. More gravel pit camping. That afternoon we came upon this dam and hydroelectric facility known as Manic 5. The last ferry ride of this trip took us across the Gulf of St. Lawrence. The unusual thing about this ferry is that everyone had to back onto the boat. Here, Jenny took a picture of our backup camera as we were boarding the vessel. This, sadly, was our last campsite of the trip in Fish Lake National Forest in Utah. Greeted by Motley, one of our two cats, we arrived home at about 5:30 on the 3rd of July. We were out for 51 days and covered 12,528 miles. A great trip. Thank you for taking the time to watch our slideshow, and we hope you enjoyed it.